OTAs in full swing. Who does Brett Whitefield think on this roster is stepping forward? We ask him.
You are Locked On Lions, your daily Detroit Lions podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's good, everybody? Matt Derry with you. It is the Locked On Lions on the Locked On Podcast Network. Indeed, your team every day on this a Thursday, May 30th and a Friday, May 31st. Thanks for making us your first listen, checking us out wherever you get your podcast. That includes our Locked On Lions YouTube channel. Please subscribe and check us out there each and every day. It is free. It is simple. Subscribe and watch us for free on YouTube. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app. If you're looking for tickets, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. OTAs in full swing. Guys, we're back in the field today. Some media was also allowed out there. And we'll get the thoughts of Brett Whitefield, the COO of Fantasy Points, today here on the program as he joins us today. Brett, great to see you.
Matt, it's awesome to be back. And I just have to say, you are awesome, man. Like, I have my own podcast now, and I take notes every time I'm on the show. The radio chops just pop through. You're such a good host, man. I just love being here, man.
Thank you, buddy. Well, nobody knows the analytics side, the numbers side better than you. And you've obviously been around the team and the building for a long time. And Fantasy Points, I know, is blowing up, and you're adding staff. You're a busy guy, huh?
Super busy. The data suite, if you haven't checked it out, data.fantasypoints.com. It is awesome for the listeners. Please go check it out. We got some really cool stuff in there, and we're just adding more. So it's excellent.
When you look at the numbers, I want to get into OTAs and everything else in the draft because we haven't had John since the draft. But when you look at the numbers with this football team, let's say compared to the Packers or the Niners or Dallas, what as far as the NFC, rankings go, what stands out for you analytically about what this Lions team's been doing?
All of the predictive metrics, they pop for the Lions. Like, they're good in everything. It's kind of crazy. Adjusted yards before contact, which is an O-line stat. Like, they rank top 5 in the NFL. Pressure rate against, top 5 in the NFL. Pressure rate getting after the quarterback, top 5 in the NFL. So just across the board, just all of the predictive metrics that predict success year over year, like they rank very high in all of them. So they've put together a really nice roster.
You just mentioned the offensive line, and obviously you and I talked around draft time, but now that we're getting to it and you're looking at it, is there a position or two that still you think maybe there'll be some post June 1 cuts next week, or is there anything that you're like looking at going, man, they could still add here or there?
Yeah, that's tough because this is probably the deepest Lions team I can remember in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I think for me, Matt, like, if I had to be honest, I think the tackle situation is a touch scary. Like, great bookend starting tackles, and I know they made a huge investment into Jamo, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit here. I just don't think Jamo is going to be ready. And if one of those tackles goes down, you're looking at what, Dan Skipper or Connor Galvin, and that, to me, I don't love that. However, a tackle's not likely to be cut that they might be interested in for that swing tackle spot. Teams don't usually let those guys go, right? So they're looking at, probably having to piecemeal it together with whatever they have, Colby Sorsdal, Gio Manu. That for me, that's it though. That's the big position. If they could somehow land a little more depth just for this year at tackle, that'd make me feel a little more confident in what they're doing.
Follow us on Twitter at Derry Speaks, at Locked On Lions, Matt Derry Facebook fan page. Follow Brett on Twitter at BG Whitefield. Some OTA highlights today, Brett. Would love your thoughts on number one, Terrion Arnold with a pick 6 on Jared Goff. Jameson Williams continues to shine, caught a deep ball today and ran away from the defense. And yes, Michael Badgley kicked a 61-yard field goal. Where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, shoot, let's start with Terrion Arnold. I mean, I loved this draft pick. He was my number 2 corner in the draft. I think he profiles as a true CB1. I think he's a guy who, like, they haven't had future prospect at corner like him since Darius Slay, honestly. Like, and he even comes with a higher pedigree than Slay did when they drafted him. So really excited about what they did there in the draft. And so the fact that he's making plays already in OTAs does not surprise me at all. The guy's an absolute stud.
What about Jamo? Dan Campbell said last week this is the most improved player on the roster. Do you believe that? And what kind of a season are you forecasting and projecting for him?
Yeah, so the tape on him was better than his numbers to end the year last year. And so when they let Josh Reynolds walk for a bag of balls, now they could have easily kept Josh Reynolds. He didn't sign for that much in Denver. But that shows you the confidence they have in Jamo. They're fully expecting him to take a step forward. And that's what this team's all about, right? Draft and develop. So Jamo steps in. His final 5 games he played last year, actually, he had a 2.59 yards per route run, which yards per route run is the most predictive stat for wide receivers, projecting future success. So even though the stats on paper weren't awesome, it started to come together. He had a 7-catch game towards the end of the year where when you go look at his route running, it started really coming together. Goff trusted him. They're getting him involved in the short part of the field, Matt, which is something they had not done. A lot of those timing and anticipation routes that Goff is so good on, they virtually ignored Jamo on those for the first 2 years. And then towards the end of the year last year, Goff and him really started to connect a little bit. And I think that points to really big things for him, because he has to be more than just a gadget / deep ball guy for them. He's going to have to do some of the dirty work. And I think you see that connection being formed in real time. So I'm pretty excited about Jamo.
Is that, you mentioned before, and this is a great point. They don't re-sign Reynolds. Sounds like they lowballed him. He got a multi-year thing out in Denver, but they didn't add anybody else. I mean, there's still receivers right now still on the street that they could pick up. Yet there seem to be content with him being, I guess, the number 2 guy. Do you kind of read it that way?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously they probably like DPJ a little bit. They drafted Antoine Green last year, so they probably feel okay with the depth. Khalif Raymond's still a good player too, field stretcher type that can win on the outside. I do think they like Jamo though. I mean, they drafted him 12th overall. They traded up to get him. This has been their guy. Campbell hasn't been shy about criticizing. I wouldn't say criticizing is the wrong word, but he hasn't been shy about saying, hey, Jamo needs to work on these things, right? So when you start now seeing Dan lavish praise on him, to me, that speaks volumes, because Dan has no problem, saying when a player needs to step up or needs to develop or needs to get better. And that's been true for Jamo, right? And so for Dan to come out as strongly as he did, that just reaffirms all my takes. I think at fantasy points, we're projecting him from a fantasy standpoint to finish as the wide receiver 46. I've been talking to John and Chris, our projection guys, saying we need to bump that way up. I think Jamo's in for a big season.
Brett Whitefield with us, COO of Fantasy Points, data.fantasypoints.com. I mentioned before about Badgley. I'm big on this show on talking about kickers. I know I get the comments on YouTube and Twitter like, what are you doing? Leave it alone. I've mentioned it for 3 years that Brad Holmes has ignored the position. Brad Holmes is great. Don't get me wrong, but is now, are we getting the Jake Bates experiment? Is he coming here, do you think? Or maybe it's Badgley's job and maybe they're just going to try him from longer distances now.
You said Badgley hit a 61-yarder today?
Yes.
That's got to be the longest field goal I can remember him hitting.
Right.
Any in training camp that long last year. So that's pretty cool. I would love to see competition, of course. I've talked to some Lions players, and I don't want to necessarily mention names, but they all seem to love Badgley. They think he can do it. I've talked to one of their specialists even who agrees with that sentiment. So I do. I mean, it's tough. I'm in this weird analytical thing, Matt, where kicking field goals is kind of bad. I love their aggression. And so my fear is that they get a better kicker and then they take the foot off the gas a little bit. I love most of the time, 99% of the time, I agree with Dan when he decides to go for it. So I like that default aggressive mentality. I think good kickers lose teams' games a lot because sometimes you settle for a field goal, team comes down, scores a touchdown, you lose.
I brought that up a couple weeks ago. I said maybe they don't want that, money guy from deep, whether it's, old school Morton Anderson or even Harrison Butker. I cringe a little bit saying that name on the show right now, but you know what I mean? Like from a football standpoint, the guy's great. And he kicks 60-yarders, as does, guy in Baltimore. But maybe that does, you're right, take away from what Dan Campbell wants to do when he's 30 yards out and, he wants to go for it.
Yep, exactly.
It's very, very interesting. Brett Whitefield with us from Fantasy Points. Coming up next, I want to get into the roster a little bit more with him and also the draft. We didn't have Brett on since the draft, and JJ McCarthy was his quarterback 1. Now he's going to be in the division. We'll get Brett's thoughts on that coming up next. But first, Locked On Lions brought to you by Gametime. NBA Finals coming up soon. We got Dallas and Minnesota still duking it out, but Mavs need one more win. They get to the finals. They play the Celtics. And if you're in those towns, you're thinking about, hey, look, let's do a road trip to the NBA Finals. You can get tickets on the Gametime app. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. The killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets. They got the last-minute tickets. They got flash deals, zone deals, and my favorite part on Game Time, and you go there for anything, theater tickets, concerts, is the view from your seat. Baseball, you know exactly where you're going to go. When you want to see go to a Tiger game, you'll know exactly where you are at Comerica Park. Look right, look left. I love that view from your seat that they've got on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back with our buddy Brett Whitefield, Fantasy Points, data.fantasypoints.com, all the analytics, the numbers. Brett sees it all, and he and his staff do a fantastic job. You look at this roster for the Lions, Brett, what stands out? What's the strength? What are you most excited about as we hit June here?
I think the obvious one is the offensive line, right? They are strong. The only thing really to complain about with that is they got 3 starters over the age of 30. That's potentially problematic moving forward. I do like that they added depth each of the last 2 years in the O-lines, maybe some developmental pieces that can replace some of those older guys. But ultimately, that offensive line is dominant. I mean, they were, I already mentioned earlier, but top 5 in both adjusted yards before contact per carry and in pressure rate allowed. Just fantastic stuff. So I think they'll be even better this year with Kevin Zeitler at right guard and Graham moving over to left guard. That should be a dominating unit and really the kind of the heartbeat of what they do. Defensively, Matt, I actually really like what they're doing in the trenches. I know, I listen to local radio here, Matt. We don't need to name names, but I mean, it's every day they're harping on the spot opposite Aiden Hutchinson. I like Marcus Davenport. I love the low risk, high reward signing that is. I think this team's been steadfast in their draft and develop approach. So you look at a guy like Josh Paschal and you think, fans have written him off because of lack of production, but this really is the year they're probably expecting him to take that step forward, just like Ife Malafanu, just like Derek Barnes, just like Levi Arunza-Urike at the end of last year. I just feel like they're really strong. I feel like this is the first time this regime has had 7, maybe 8 guys that can all get in there and play. You had Mekhi Wingo through the draft, who was my favorite pick of the whole draft, probably. They're awesome. They got multiple fronts. They play a lot of odd front. They'll mix in some even front. They have that exotic blitz package. They got guys that can move all over the place. Obviously, DJ Reader plugs a huge need as well. So I just really like what they're doing in the trenches on defense.
It's interesting. I mentioned this yesterday on the show, but this Terrell Williams pickup as D-line coach is getting a lot of hype. And it's like, look, you had a guy in here in John Davis last year that was there for 1 year and fired him because they felt like, wait a minute, Vrabel's leaving Tennessee. Holy hell. Titans clean house. Terrell Williams is available. And they went out and got him. And he's considered by many to be the best D-line coach in the league. So, maybe that's what helps him get over the hump.
Yeah, Terrell Williams is, when you look at the resources he had to work with in Tennessee and the production he got out of that D-line, short of Jeffrey Simmons, they didn't have a lot of talent there. And he got a lot out of them, especially in run defense, facets, scheming up pressures, creating the illusion of pressure. These are all things that we saw this Lions defense try to do at the end of last year. He's just going to take that all to another level.
You mentioned Davenport before. Is it, Brett, and you watch all the film, is it just health with him? Because if he's healthy and this training staff can get him up and running, you seeing a double-digit sack type of situation?
Double digits a little lofty. I'm more concerned with pressure rate and pressures, than sack percentage or sacks. But he has the potential for that for sure. If he's healthy, his pass rush win rate. I don't know why that's such a tongue twister. Pass rush win rate. When he's healthy has been exceptional. It was good last year. It was good the last time he played a full season. Up there near 20%. So Hutchinson's never had the opportunity to play with the guy close to that good. So that could be huge. He's likely to see favorable matchups as well, playing next to DJ Reader or Aleem McNeil. So I again really like what they're doing. I think as a whole that unit should be a lot better this year.
Talking to Brett Whitefield, Fantasy Points COO. I want to ask you, you referenced before the break about the receiving core and adding somebody else or going there. But Antoine Green versus DPJ is probably the most interesting battle maybe in training camp of all of them, right?
Yeah, for that like traditional X role for sure. I think what's interesting about the Ben Johnson offense is they don't necessarily need a traditional X. They use motion so much. They use pre-snap shifts. They're going to get favorable looks however they want to. Amon-Ra St. Brown played X receiver a lot last year. A lot of fans don't realize that, but he was lined up as an X receiver on like 40% of snaps. So like that's significant, something worth noting. I know he's traditionally perceived as a slot only type guy, but he just hasn't been that the last 2 years. So I think you're going to see a lot of combos of different guys. I think you'll see Jamo, Caliph, and Amon-Ra on the field together. You'll definitely see DPJ working in there. But as far as like when they want a traditional X on the field, that is the big training camp battle to watch. Antoine Green versus DPJ. Green's going to give you more true speed, take the top off, vertical threat than DPJ. But DPJ is more of a Josh Reynolds type. Good route runner, possession type receiver, ball skills, body control, etc.
I talked to somebody that heard the show the other day when I was mentioning Green and DPJ, I think last week, and they texted me and said, you're overdoing it with that matchup because Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be out wide a lot more this year.
Oh, wow.
What do you think about that?
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, when you saw how Alabama used him, he lined up in the slot or out wide. I think he had 23 targets from the slot or out wide at Alabama his last year. Then you hear the way they talked him up going into last year. We didn't really see a whole lot of creative usage of Jahmyr Gibbs. He had a fantastic year, don't get me wrong. But we didn't see that creative usage that they were kind of touting all through the pre-draft or the post-draft process and then training camp. If they're going to get more creative with him, put a little bit more on his plate this year, that would not surprise me at all. So I for sure could see that.
What do you think about Hendon Hooker? I mean, now that the Goff contract's done, we can stop with the Hendon Hooker for the future as quarterback here, but you're going to have somebody ready if something happens to Jared. He's going to get a lot of reps. He's obviously going to play a ton in August. What do you think of him coming back from that ACL?
I really liked him coming out. You know that. I think we had a conversation about him pre-draft last year.
Yeah.
So from what they look for in a quarterback, ball, accuracy, repeatable mechanics, accuracy, good footwork, athletic ability. He checks all those boxes. I think where he'll have the big developmental curve will come with the anticipation throws, reading coverages. He didn't have to do a lot of that at Tennessee. A lot of it was kind of baked into the cake there for him, predetermined reads, stuff like that. So he's gonna have to get better on that front. But he's as a backup, I think the floor he gives you with some athletic ability is nice. That's something a lot of teams covet in a backup. The ability to extend drives with your feet. I think he brings that to the table for sure. Some design QB run type stuff. I think Ben Johnson will be really creative with how he uses him if the need ever arises. I'm really excited to see him in training camp, honestly, to see kind of where he gets. He's got, we have a long way to go and from now till then for him to develop even more. I know Dan said some positive things about him today as well. So I think from a backup situation, that's probably a better spot they've been in than, what the Nate Sudfeld, David Blau years for sure. Obviously last year they had Teddy, but I like Hendon.
Yeah, I was just thinking the other day about Jeff Driscoll when he had to come into a game, and certainly David Blau was such a great guy, but unfortunately really couldn't play football. So great dude, don't get me wrong. One more thing on Hooker, there are some teams that go, no, backup's got to be a veteran. It's got to be somebody that's done it. But it doesn't sound like the Lions are that team, does it?
No, and from they're pretty analytical minded. And I know Dan has this, meathead mantra or, persona, but he's pretty analytical minded. And I think with Hendon, it's like the upside of drafting a day 2 quarterback and hitting on them and then potentially being able to flip them at a later date or get high level backup play for them is so huge. I don't like recycling these veterans. If we're talking like Andy Dalton, that's different, right? Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater, these guys are career awesome backups. We're not talking about that. I don't like the constant backup QB carousel in the NFL. I'd much rather invest into a young player that has a high, all the physical tools you want in a quarterback that could eventually develop into a starter. Because if you hit on that player, the reward is massive.
No question about it. All right. I want to get Brett's thoughts on this draft class. We had him on before the draft. Want to get his thoughts now post draft, including, like he mentioned before, Big Geo as a guy that Brett has seen and has watched tape on. We'll get his thoughts coming up next. But first, here on Locked On Lions, we got to tell you about our friends at FanDuel. Now is the time, folks, to hop on FanDuel.com/lockedon and check out everything that goes on. If you want to put money down on some of these playoff games, NBA playoffs, NHL, Rangers and Panthers game 5 tonight. It's winner take all time in both leagues, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You don't have to bet on the spread or winner or loser. You can pick some players that you like and do some player props, whether it's NHL guys, Luka for game 5, whatever it is for Dallas and the Minnesota, you can do that as well. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Our main man, Brett Whitefield, with us, COO of Fantasy Points. Go to data.fantasypoints.com. Check out all of his work. Draft-wise, Brett, I know you and I talked before the draft. Let's get this out of the way because it's funny. You were the only guy that said J.J. McCarthy was #1 QB on your board. Now McCarthy's in the division. Caleb's in the division. How are you going to watch that? How are you going to are you going to root for J.J. to say, hey, I told you could play, or how do you think that fit's going to go in Minnesota?
So I'm very happy for JJ that he landed in a really good set of circumstances. He's lands on a team in Minnesota that's got bookend tackle play, probably top 5 tackle duo in the NFL, excellent receiver core, pass catching unit with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson. Not a lot of rookie quarterbacks get to land in that situation. So I feel nice. I feel good that he landed there. Stinks for the Lions, though, because that team probably got a lot more competitive long term. Same with Chicago and Caleb Williams landing there. And I think it's cool that JJ and Caleb land in the same division because we'll get to compare those two head to head quite often. So that's maybe it's, perhaps I'm vindicated early on, but we'll see.
Arnold and Rakestraw, if I would have told you the Lions were going to get both guys in the top 61, what would you have said?
Not possible, especially they traded up for one, so that makes it even less likely that it's possible. So I don't know. That's pretty. I almost still can't believe it. I think Rakestraw was a top 40 player for me. Arnold was a top 20 player for me. So just excellent value at both spots.
When it comes to Arnold, let's start with him first. As a rookie, throwing him out there, and certainly there's some veterans already ahead of him. They signed Robertson for a reason. They traded for Davis for a reason. Mosley is still here, but how do you see them kind of utilizing Terrion right away?
Yeah, I think he slides into that, one of those outside spots for sure. What's interesting is both him and Rakestraw can play in the slot. And I find that interesting because they didn't really make any moves at safety. And so I think they could get creative in the future with how these guys are deployed. And I think Arnold's probably more your outside guy. Rakestraw, though, could play inside if they ever wanted to move Branch to more of a safety role or a hybrid role. But I do think Arnold probably wins the outside job. I know Amik Robertson's no slouch. I think he's a very good player. I know he's commonly miscast as a slot corner, but he can play outside too. And his best tape is probably actually on the outside. So I think that will be a good training camp battle between him and Arnold. And then I'm not sure where Rakestraw slides in right away. He might be depth for Carlton Davis on the outside, or he could be depth for Brian Branch at nickel.
Why do you think Rakestraw dropped the way he did?
I think there's concerns about his size and physical nature. So he's a very physical guy, a little bit undersized, low BMI. I kind of, what's funny, if you follow my mock draft through the process, I think in my mock draft 1.0, I said that Rakestraw was the most Dan Campbell player in the entire draft. And then the Lions end up drafting him. So that's even funnier, but he throws himself around a little bit like Devin Witherspoon last year, where he plays with reckless abandon. And I think that size, BMI, He's also not the fastest guy in the world, although the GPS times on him were much more flattering than his 40 times. So I think ultimately, though, the combination of those things, undersized, not the best 40 time in the world, I think that made him drop a little bit.
Brad Holmes was busy with the trade ups, Manu and Vaki. What were your reaction to those picks?
So Manu pre-draft, I only got to watch 2 games. It's really hard to find tape on him. And the tape I did get, it's like you can't even really evaluate it. I didn't even score him, Matt, just because I didn't want to be dishonest. I did, write some notes up for him, but it's hilarious. The tape is so funny. It's basically him playing against 210-pound defensive linemen, and he's just tossing them 8 feet on every play. Really hard to evaluate because it's not SEC football. It's not even, Division II college football. It's worse than that.
Yeah.
So it's tough. But what you do see on the tape is just a mountain of a man that has very, very good athletic traits. And I know, like, he tested okay at his pro day. I think he's a better athlete than he tested, though. Just moves insanely well for a guy that's 350 plus pounds. So I really like that. I love the trade up to get him. If you're going to invest into, the 3rd, 4th round, you want high upside guys that, especially when your roster is as deep as the Lions, like, you're looking for future starters at those picks. I love drafting a guy with the traits of Gio Manu. I just think it's a really good, savvy move. The Sione Vake thing, he obviously screamed Lions the entire pre-draft process, right? Like, he was clearly going to be a Lion at some point. It was interesting they announced him as a running back because I kind of had a feeling they'd draft a running back, but I like his tape at safety a little bit. So I was surprised. He was number 97 on my board, and so for where they got him, I felt like it was perfectly fine value. I think ultimately, though, he slides in as a special teams ace, that kind of maybe a pseudo kick returner / gunner type player who's just valuable in the margins.
Tell me about, you mentioned before, Mekhi Wingo. I'm with you. That's my favorite pick. My buddy John Eads, who covers LSU football down on TV in Baton Rouge, is like, I cannot believe he's still there in the 6th round. And then lo and behold, the Lions take him. How big of a steal did you see that one?
I mean, massive steal. Like, this is where Brad Holmes was in his bag. Those 2 6th-round picks and Wingo and Mahogany, like, just absolute insane value. But Wingo, like, the NFL keeps doing this, Matt, where you get a weirdly sized defensive lineman that's 6 foot, 280 pounds, and he's not a traitsy guy, doesn't have the arm length we want. Aaron Donald being a 10th overall pick or whatever, 11th, whatever he was a mistake. Kalijah Cansey last year. Obviously, Wingo doesn't have that pedigree. But point being is the NFL routinely undervalues these guys, and they're difference makers. Wingo can play on the edge. He can play 3 technique. He's going to get pressure on the quarterback. He's going to make splash plays in the backfield, and those plays really matter. Like, a tackle for -4 in the backfield or a sack. Those are drive-ending plays. I love getting a guy with his physical talent on the D-line as a rotational piece. It's just excellent drafting.
Brett, you're the best, man. Great to see you and have you on as always, and we'll do it again soon.
Thanks, Matt, for having me.
Brett Whitefield with us, COO of Fantasy Points, here on a Thursday edition of Locked On Lions. Back again tomorrow.